The old mountain road had no name on any map. It was the kind of road that seemed to appear only when it wanted to be found, a narrow thread of cracked asphalt winding up through pine forests so thick that even the afternoon sun could not reach the ground beneath them. Zara Khan pressed her face against the car window and watched the trees blur past, her breath fogging the cold glass. "Are you sure this is the right way?" she asked, glancing at her husband. Ahan Khan kept both hands on the steering wheel, his knuckles pale. He was 26 years old, broad-shouldered, with kind dark eyes and a smile that had made Zara fall in love with him 3 years ago in a university library. Tonight, however, that smile was absent. "The GPS says 2 more kilometers," he said. "And before you ask, no, there is no phone signal up here. There hasn't been since we left the highway." Zara pulled her wool cardigan tighter. They had been married for exactly 4 days. The wedding in Lahore had been everything their families dreamed of: hundreds of guests, golden lights strung across a garden the size of a football field, enough food to feed a small army, and Zara in a red bridal dress that had taken 3 tailors 4 months to embroider. It had been beautiful. It had also been exhausting. So when Ahan's old university friend Bilal had offered them the use of his family's mountain bungalow, remote, private, absolutely stunning, Bilal had promised, they had both said yes immediately. A quiet honeymoon. Just the 2 of them. No relatives. No photographers. No one requesting photographs or offering unsolicited marriage advice. They had not asked why Bilal offered so eagerly, or why his eyes had done something strange when Ahan mentioned they planned to stay for a week. They had not asked. And now they were here. The bungalow appeared around a final bend in the road, and Zara's first thought was that bungalow was entirely the wrong word for it. It was enormous, a 3-story colonial mansion built from dark stone, with a wide veranda that wrapped around the entire ground floor, shuttered windows on every level, and a steep slate roof from which 2 chimneys rose against the darkening sky like raised fingers. It sat at the very edge of a cliff, overlooking a valley so deep that the bottom was already swallowed by shadow, though the sun had not yet fully set. "Bilal called this a bungalow," Ahan said slowly. "Bilal," Zara replied, "has clearly never been to a bungalow." They got out of the car. The mountain air was sharp and cold, carrying the scent of pine and something else, something older, like damp stone and extinguished candles. The gravel crunched under their feet as they walked to the front door, where a brass key had been left in an envelope taped to the wood, exactly as Bilal had promised. The envelope was damp, as though it had been there for some time. The key fit. The door swung open with the deep, resonant groan of old hinges, and they stepped inside. The entrance hall was grand and gloomy. A wide staircase rose before them to the upper floors, its banister carved with intricate patterns, vines and birds and shapes that were harder to identify in the low light. A chandelier hung above them, its crystals filmed with dust. The floorboards were dark wood, polished to a mirror shine despite the apparent age of everything else. Someone had been maintaining this house. Someone had been here, recently. "There's electricity," Ahan said, flicking a switch. Warm light flooded the hall, and they both exhaled with relief. They explored cautiously, room by room. The ground floor had a sitting room with heavy velvet furniture, a dining room with a long table set for 12, and a kitchen that was surprisingly modern. Someone had installed new appliances without touching the old walls. The upper floors held bedrooms, 6 of them, each furnished with the same heavy, dark aesthetic. The master bedroom at the end of the top floor hallway was the largest, with a window that faced the valley and a 4-poster bed draped in deep burgundy curtains. "It's beautiful," Zara said, standing at the window. The valley below was now completely dark. Stars were appearing above, more than she had ever seen from the city. "It's something," Ahan agreed, putting his arm around her. They had dinner from the supplies they had brought. Simple food, eaten at the enormous dining table, their voices oddly hushed as though the house itself discouraged loudness. Afterward, Ahan built a fire in the sitting room fireplace and they sat together watching the flames, and for a little while everything was peaceful. It was Zara who first noticed the portrait. She had not seen it when they arrived. It hung at the far end of the sitting room, partially obscured by the shadows that the firelight cast. But as the fire burned lower and the light shifted, she saw it clearly.
a large oil painting in a heavy gilded frame, depicting a man in dark robes who appeared to be from another century entirely. He was tall, with a pale, angular face, a black beard, and eyes that were painted with such unsettling precision that they seemed to follow you. Beneath the painting, a small plaque read, Malik Ueljabal, Lord of the Mountain. Who is that? Zara asked. Ahan looked up from the fire. Probably some old ancestor of Bilal's family. Old money, old portraits. He's staring at me. Portraits do that. Come to bed. Zara looked at the portrait one more time before she followed her husband upstairs. The painted eyes watched her go. She told herself it was her imagination. She was not entirely wrong, but she was not entirely right, either. The first night passed quietly, or quietly enough. Zara slept fitfully, troubled by dreams she could not remember upon waking. Only the sensation remained, a feeling of being watched, of something vast and patient circling just beyond the edge of vision. She woke at 3 in the morning to find the room very cold, though the windows were shut, and she lay still for a long time listening to the silence before sleep took her again. In the morning, sunlight transformed the mansion entirely. It streamed through the high windows and illuminated the dust motes floating in the air, and the valley below was green and breathtaking, and Ahan made tea in the kitchen while Zara stood on the veranda wrapped in a blanket and watched mist rise from the trees far below. I want to explore, she said when he brought her tea. The house. The grounds. There must be gardens. Old houses like this always have gardens. They found them on the eastern side of the mansion. Formal gardens that had once been elaborate but were now overgrown, stone pathways nearly invisible beneath encroaching grass and wildflowers. There was a fountain at the center, dry, its basin filled with dead leaves. Stone benches lined the paths, and at the garden's edge, where the cliff fell away to the valley, a low stone wall provided a barrier and a view. It was at this wall that Zara felt it for the first time. She was leaning against the stone, looking out at the valley, when a sensation passed over her. Warm, unlike the mountain air, and with a quality she could not name. It was not unpleasant. It was more like standing in a sunbeam, or stepping into a room where someone had been burning incense. But the sensation was accompanied by a certainty, irrational and complete, that she was not alone. That something was standing very close behind her. She turned quickly. There was nothing there. Only the garden path, the overgrown flower beds, and Ahan 20 meters away examining an old sundial. She said nothing to him about it. Not yet. That evening, she began to hear the voice. It came for the first time just after sunset, when she was alone in the master bedroom changing for dinner. A whisper, low, masculine, speaking in a language she did not recognize. Not Urdu, not Punjabi, not Arabic, not any language she had studied. It was something older, something that seemed to predate the categories she knew, a language made of stone and wind and deep water. She went very still. The whisper came again. She could not understand the words, but the tone was unmistakable. Reverent. Wondering. As though someone were speaking of something precious. Ahan, she called. He was downstairs. She could hear him moving in the kitchen. The whisper faded. Zara stood in the middle of the room, her heart hammering, and told herself it was the wind through the old walls. Old houses made noises. She knew this. She was not a superstitious woman. She went downstairs and said nothing about the whisper. That night, she dreamed. In the dream, she was standing in the mansion's sitting room, but the room was different. The furniture was different, older, and the fire in the grate burned with a strange blue light. The portrait of Malik Ueljabal was there, but in the dream the portrait was not a painting. It was a window, and on the other side of the window, the man in the portrait was looking at her. He was tall, extraordinarily tall, in a way that did not seem quite natural. He wore the same dark robes as in the portrait, but in the dream they moved, shifting like smoke. His face was angular and pale, his black beard precisely trimmed, and his eyes. In the portrait they had seemed merely unnerving, but in the dream they were something else. They were the darkest eyes she had ever seen, deeper than any human eye should be, and they looked at her with an expression that made her breath catch in her chest. He raised one hand and pressed it flat against the glass between them. His mouth moved. She heard, very faintly, the same whispered language from before, And this time, impossibly, she understood 2 words of it. You. Beautiful. She woke with a gasp, sitting upright in the darkness. Ahan slept undisturbed beside her. The room was cold. The curtains around the 4-poster bed shifted slightly, though there was no wind. Zara sat very still for a long time. Then she reached out and took her husband's hand and held it tightly until morning. On the 3rd day, she decided to explore the mansion's library. She had noticed the library on their first evening, a room off the main hallway, its door slightly ajar, filled floor to ceiling with old books. She had intended to investigate it from the beginning, being a graduate student of literature, but somehow she had kept finding reasons to put it off. Now, with Ahan out on the veranda reading his own book and the afternoon hours stretching ahead of her, she went in. The library smelled of old paper and leather and something faintly sweet, like dried flowers. The books were organized in no system she could immediately identify. Urdu texts beside Latin volumes beside handwritten journals in scripts she did not recognize. She moved along the shelves slowly, trailing her fingers across the spines. She stopped at a journal whose cover bore an embossed crescent moon. She took it from the shelf. The pages were yellowed and fragile, the writing inside dense and meticulous. In a formal Urdu she had to read slowly. It was a diary. The writer's name, given on the first page, was Rehana Bano. The year was 1923. Zara sat in the library's one armchair and began to read. Rehana Bano had come to this same mansion as a new bride. She wrote of its grandeur and its strangeness, of the mountain air and the view from the valley, of her husband who was kind but frequently absent on business. She wrote of the portrait. She too had noticed the portrait, and she wrote, with increasing unease, of the things she began to experience after the first night. The whispering, the sensation of being watched, the dreams. Zara's hands went cold around the journal. She read faster. Rehana Bano wrote that she had spoken to an old caretaker of the property, a man who had worked there for 40 years. The caretaker had told her the history of the mansion, or as much of it as he dared. The house, he said, had been built on a place that was known, in the old stories, as a habitation of the jinn. Not the minor spirits of popular legend, but something greater, a being of enormous age and power who had claimed this mountain as his own long before human beings had ever settled these valleys. The man in the portrait was not human. He had taken on a human form, once, to interact with the family who built the mansion, and an artist had been commissioned to paint him. But he was not human. He was Malik el-Jabal, the lord of the mountain, and he had been here since before memory, and he would be here long after. He was not malevolent, the caretaker had said carefully. He had never harmed anyone in the house. But he was particular. He had interests, curiosities, and once, in a great while, something would capture those interests. In 1923, that something was Rehana Bano. She stopped reading. The library was very quiet. Outside, through the single narrow window, she could see the edge of the valley and the darkening sky beyond. She turned to the final entries in the journal. The handwriting had changed. It was shakier now, rushed. He speaks to me, Rehana Bano had written. I know it is him. I cannot understand the words, but I feel their meaning. He finds me. The word she had used was Maghrub, which meant, roughly, captivating, or entrancing, or something that one cannot look away from. I feel his attention like warmth. My husband does not know. I do not know how to tell my husband. I do not know what to do. The last entry was 3 lines. We are leaving tomorrow. My husband has agreed. I have not told him why. God willing, this feeling will fade once we are away from this mountain. God willing, I will not dream of those eyes again. The journal ended there. Zara sat for a long time with the closed journal in her lap. Then she stood, replaced it exactly where she had found it, and walked out of the library into the hallway, where the portrait of Malik el-Jabal hung at the far end of the sitting room. She made herself look at it directly. The painted eyes looked back. For a moment, just a moment, she thought she saw something shift in those painted eyes, like a flame blown sideways by wind. She turned away and went to find her husband. That night, Zara told Ahan everything. She had considered not telling him. She had considered this carefully, turning the decision over and examining it from every angle. the way she did with problems in her academic work. She had considered that he might not believe her, or might think she was being dramatic, or might be frightened. In the end, she told him because he was her husband, and they had promised each other honesty, and she was genuinely frightened and needed him to know. He listened without interrupting. He was sitting across from her at the kitchen table, and as she spoke his expression moved through several stages. Gentle skepticism, careful attention, something that was not quite fear but was certainly its cousin. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment. "The journal," he said. "Show me." She brought him to the library. He read the relevant sections slowly, going back twice to reread passages. She watched his face. "Zara," he said finally, "we should leave." "Yes." "Tomorrow morning. First light." "Yes." "Ahan." "I believe you," he said, before she could ask. He reached across and took her hand. "I believe you. This place is wrong. I felt it too. I just told myself it was nothing. Old house. Old stories." He closed the journal. "We'll leave tomorrow." They went back to the kitchen and made tea, and they sat together at the table with all the lights on, and Ahan stayed up with her long past midnight, talking about ordinary things. The apartment they were returning to in Lahore, the places they planned to visit, the future they were building together, until the talking gradually softened into sleepy silence, and they both laid their heads on their folded arms on the kitchen table and slept there, in the bright light, until dawn. In the master bedroom, untouched, the curtains around the four-poster bed shifted slowly in still air. What happened in the final hours before dawn was something Zara would spend years trying to explain, and never quite managing. She woke at the kitchen table. Ahan was still asleep beside her. The kitchen lights were on. The clock on the wall said 4:17 in the morning. She did not know what had woken her. And then she heard it, not the whisper this time, but something louder. A sound from somewhere in the house. A sound like a door opening. Like footsteps on old floorboards. Like something moving through the hallway toward the kitchen. She put her hand on Ahan's arm. "Ahan." He was awake instantly. He had always been a light sleeper. He heard it too. She could tell by the way he went still, the way his eyes moved to the kitchen door. The footsteps stopped just outside. Silence. Then, through the closed door, that voice. That whispering. But louder now, loud enough that Ahan heard it too. She saw it in his face. He heard it. He gripped her hand under the table. The whisper spoke. It spoke for a long time, in that language of stone and wind and deep water. And this time, Zara understood more of it than 2 words. She could not have explained how. The understanding came the way understanding sometimes does in dreams, not through translation but through a sudden, complete, bone-deep knowing. The voice was saying, "I have waited. I am patient. I am the mountain, and I am the stone, and I am the darkness in the valley before the first fire was lit. I do not mean harm. I have never meant harm to any who came here. But I am old and I am lonely and beauty is rare and I have seen none like yours in 100 years. I do not ask for much. I ask only to look. I ask only to be permitted to stand in the same place where you stand, and look and remember for the centuries ahead." A pause. Then, "I know you are leaving. I know I cannot hold you here. That is not my nature, and it is not my wish. But before you go, I ask only this, do not be afraid of me. Do not be afraid." The presence outside the door, because it was a presence, a thickness in the air, a weight that was not physical but was absolutely real, began to recede. The footsteps moved away, moved down the hallway, moved up the staircase, moved through the upper floors, faded. Silence returned to the mansion. Zara and Ahan sat at the kitchen table for a very long time without speaking. The clock ticked. Somewhere in the valley below, a bird began to call, the first bird of the approaching dawn. It was Ahan who finally spoke. "Are you all right?" "Yes," Zara said. She considered for a moment. "Are you?" Yes." He let out a long, slow breath. "I think I am." "Did you understand it?" she asked. "Some of it. The end of it." He looked at her. "It said not to be afraid." "Yes." "That's a strange thing for something terrifying to say." I know. They sat with that for a while. We're still leaving, Ahan said. Absolutely, Zara agreed. First light. The moment the sun comes up. He squeezed her hand. She squeezed back. They packed quickly and efficiently in the grey light before sunrise, carrying their bags to the car, moving fast without quite running. The mansion watched them from its dark windows. The valley below was still full of night. Zara was carrying the last bag to the car when she stopped. She stood at the entrance to the house, bag in hand, and looked back into the hallway. At the far end, through the sitting room doorway, she could see the portrait of Malik El-Jabal in the early grey light. The painted eyes were still. The gilded frame was still. Everything was still. She thought about Rehana Bano, 100 years ago, leaving this same house. Hoping the feeling would fade. Hoping not to dream of those eyes again. She thought about a voice that had said, I do not mean harm. I have never meant harm. I am lonely. She did not speak. But she stood there for a moment, looking at the portrait, and she gave a single, small nod. The smallest acknowledgement. The kind you give to something when you are not sure it deserves fear, but you are certain it deserves recognition. Then she turned and walked to the car, and got in, and Ahan started the engine. The mansion shrank in the rearview mirror as they drove back down the mountain road, through the pine forest, back toward the world of phone signals and highway traffic and Lahore and their new apartment and their new life. The sun was rising over the valley. The mist was burning away. Zara watched the mansion until the trees blocked it from sight. She never went back. But sometimes, in the years that followed, in quiet moments, in the space between waking and sleeping, she felt it. The warmth of that attention. The patience of something very old. Standing at a respectful distance. Looking. She never told her children about the mansion on Devil's Peak. Some stories, she decided, are not meant to be passed on. Some things are better left to the mountains and the mist and the long silence of centuries. But she kept the key. She had taken it from the front door when they left, and she kept it in a small wooden box at the back of her jewelry drawer for the rest of her life. A brass key, slightly damp, from a house at the top of a mountain that had no name on any map. She was never entirely sure why she kept it. She only knew that she could not bring herself to throw it away. Years later, when Zara was a professor and Ahan was a successful architect and their children were grown, a student in Zara's graduate seminar asked her, during a discussion of supernatural fiction, whether she had ever experienced anything she could not explain. The other students waited, pens poised. It was the kind of question students always asked professors, half expecting a politely deflecting answer. Zara was quiet for a moment. Once, she said. A long time ago. On a mountain. What happened? The student asked. Zara looked out the seminar room window at the city beyond. Something very old, she said carefully, saw me. And I saw it. And we agreed, without words, without negotiation, that we would leave each other in peace. She paused. I think that's the most honest description I can give. The student pressed on. Were you afraid? Zara thought of the whisper in the hallway. The footsteps in the dark. The painted eyes in the portrait. The cold weight of that massive, patient attention. She thought of a voice saying, "Do not be afraid." Yes, she said. And also, no. Both, at the same time. The way you're afraid of something vast and ancient that is not cruel. The way you're afraid of the ocean. Not because it wants to hurt you, but because you understand, very suddenly, how small you are. She turned back to her students. That, she said, picking up her pen, is the difference between terror and awe. And it is the most important distinction in all of horror literature. Shall we continue? They continued. And somewhere, far away, on a mountain with no name on any map, in a mansion overlooking a valley full of mist, a portrait hung in a dusty sitting room, and the painted eyes were still and patient, as they had always been, as they would always be. Waiting for nothing. Needing nothing. Simply there. Simply old. Simply watching the centuries pass, the way a mountain watches them. Without hurry, without grief, without end.